depression is a huge problem today. About 18% of the U.S. population has been diagnosed with depression, and just imagine how many cases were never diagnosed. The Book of Job is a kind of ancient manual for dealing with depression, and much of the good advice is hidden within the story. Job is a book about a lot of things. It's about Job's anxiety. It's about anger directed at God. It's a book about why bad things happen to good people. That sounds very modern, doesn't it? And it's about forces of evil at work in the world. It's about faith, and yes, it's a book about depression. We say depression because it's reasonable to assume that a man who loses his fortune, his family, and his health goes through some serious depression. As Job himself said, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb?" Now that's a man looking back on his life with depression involved. Job's journey, like ours today, was filled with suffering and eventual renewal, and it continues to speak to us about the struggles of depression, and, in the end, great truths are revealed about healing that we need to hear today. Job's story begins with prosperity, wealth, family, and then in a series of devastating events, Job loses his wealth, his children, and his health. Stripped of everything that once gave his life meaning, Job falls into despair. "May the day of my birth perish," he cries. His lament isn't just sadness over a specific loss. It's an all-encompassing sense of meaninglessness that many of us who battle depression can relate to. Depression often looks to an idealized past that has been lost, and the present is painful because of that loss. So what advice does the book of Job offer for those with depression? First, there is no quick fix. Early in his healing journey, Job wrestles with the question of why. His friends offer simplistic explanations, insisting his suffering must be punishment for sin. But Job refuses these answers, and instead of finding quick fixes, he begins to accept his lack of control over his situation. Today we often seek a quick fix for depression, a drug, winning the lottery, finding Prince Charming or Cinderella. But those things are often fantasy fixes that fade quickly in the light of reality. For those battling depression today, Job offers a practical lesson. Stop trying to fix everything immediately. Depression often feels overwhelming because it demands a solution for something that seems unfixable. Job's turning point out of depression isn't when his circumstances finally improve, but when he really confronts the reality of his suffering. He ultimately accepts his fate by acknowledging God's power and wisdom, even when he doesn't fully understand the reasons behind his trials. It takes time to come to this realization. It didn't happen fast. 2. Job's suffering clarifies his real purpose. Here's the ironic lesson of Job. Depression often feels like the end of the story, but it can be the beginning of transformation. Job's suffering ultimately leads to restoration. His fortunes are returned, and his understanding of life and his experience of God deepens profoundly. This doesn't mean that every story of depression ends with a complete reversal of circumstances, but it does remind us that growth and renewal are possible, even in the darkest times. You see, Job never gave up on God. Even though he was angry and questioned God, his faith in a deeper good was not broken. He was rewarded with a direct encounter with God, which very few of us have experienced. We have to repeat that because it is so important. Job's depression was rewarded with a direct encounter with God, something that echoes Adam and Eve, Moses, the great prophets, and later the apostles. As Job said, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." That real encounter with God is what we are made for. It's our deepest purpose in life. 3. Prayer heals Job. If we look at the action of Job's story, his transformation happens through prayer. Now, Job's prayer is what we might call today an angry prayer. But during Old Testament days, it was a lament, a sorrowful prayer. I'll tell you something about Job's lament. It led to an amazing outcome. The lament is the key. Job's laments are raw and honest, expressing pain and questioning God's decisions. Yet they often hold an underlying faith in God's ability to hear and respond. They embody a relationship with God where human sorrow and divine care coexist. Laments also appear frequently in the Psalms and occasionally in the Gospels. Job's laments remind us that depression isn't just a state of despair. It's an invitation for us to wrestle with life's hardest questions. "Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him," Job declares. Now, the real lesson is that Job never loses his faith because he never stops talking to God. His prayer of asking why over and over is answered. And the answer is that his suffering leads to the one thing that matters most in life, a real experience of God that triumphs over his depression and suffering. Prayer, even angry prayer, even questioning God, can lead to personal revelation. Now, most of us don't have to pay such a high price, as did Job, for an experience of God. As a matter of fact, at New Christian Counseling, we make the journey rather pleasant. There is a depression healing prayer that accompanies this video. Click on the link to start your journey of discovery.